council meeting order. Recommendation that the regular council meeting be suspended and the special committee of the whole meeting be convened. Moved by Councillor Randhawa, seconded by Councillor Adie. All those in favor? Motion's carried. So we'll call a special committee of the whole meeting to order here. So we'll do the adoption of the agenda. So the agenda of special meeting, committee of the whole meeting of April 11th, 2022 be adopted as circulated. Moved by Councillor Moreau, seconded by Councillor Randhawa. All those in favor? Motion's carried. On to petitions and delegations. Corinne Bombin, Chief Financial Officer and Deputy City Manager, and on regards to the proposed 2022 budget.
Hello? There we go. Hello? Hello? Apparently I'm not close enough. All right. I'll just share my screen. Okay. Good evening. This is our second of two public consultations on the 2022 budget. Staff presented the 2022 municipal budget on March 14th, which accompanied the report to council that day. Today we will be showing a small snapshot of that presentation. On March 14th, we proposed, there we go, an increase of 3.63% to the mill rate to fund city services at existing levels. This means properties with an assessment increase of 26% or more above last year will see an increase to their municipal taxes. The increase to the average assessed value homeowner is $67. The significant cost drivers behind the recommended increase are made up of an allocation towards unforeseen emergency repairs in 2022, rehousing the public works crew, additional fire relief staff instead of bearing overtime costs, a mandated increase in the RCMP contract following their union negotiations, and adding the new 24-hour washroom service. On the far right column are the proposed municipal rates for 2022 for residential, light industrial, business, and not-for-profit. As the screen identifies, the proposed rate for homeowners is lower than the mill rate in 2021. This is a result of recalculating the mill rate to adjust for the market increase in assessed values since 2021. Property owners are encouraged to calculate their expected taxes in order to be prepared for the payment due date of July 4th at midnight. On the city's webpage under Quick Links, property owners can view our 2022 budget informational documents, including our proposed 5-year financial plan, our 2022 budget presentation from March 14th, and the documents prepared for council that same day, as well as those prepared in December relating to department requests. Also available is our budget simulation, which is another way to provide feedback on the budget. The budget simulation is also presented on the landing page as shown here. Submissions from the simulation will be shared with council after the simulation closes tomorrow at 4:30 p.m. Property owners are reminded that the property tax notice they receive includes taxes we collect on behalf of other agencies. These funds are remitted to agencies and make up approximately 30% of the total tax bill. Only the general and library charge are in respect of the city's budget. The province offers residents the homeowner grant and the tax deferral program. These programs are available to reduce property taxes paid and defer the tax payments through a loan that is recovered at the time of sale. Details of these programs can be found on the provincial government website, the city's website, or on your property tax notice. Homeowners must make annual application to the province for the homeowner grant before the tax payment deadline on July 4th, or provincial penalty will be applied. The homeowner grant can be applied for now. Staff would like to remind home and business owners that property taxes can be paid in advance on a monthly basis through a pre-authorized withdrawal program offered by the city. Paying monthly can smooth out the financial impact of property taxes, as well as those with mortgages who can have their property tax payments combined through their lending institution. Anyone interested in setting up a pre-authorized withdrawal program are encouraged to contact City Hall. And thank you for listening to this short presentation.
Awesome. Thanks, Corinne. So I guess we'll go on to questions from the public, if we have any members of the public. On to the next. Okay. So we'll go on to reports, questions, and inquiries from members of council. Okay, we will call to a motion to adjourn the special committee of the whole and reconvene the regular council meeting. Moved by Councillor Moreau, seconded by Councillor Adey. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion's carried. So we'll start with the adoption of the agenda. So recommendation that the agenda for the regular council meeting of April 11th, 2022 be adopted as presented. Moved by Councillor Neese, seconded by Councillor Cunningham. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion's carried. So minutes, recommendation that the minutes of the special council meeting of March 28th, 2022 be adopted. Moved by Councillor Niche, second by Councillor Moreau. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion's carried. The minutes of the regular council meeting of March 28th, 2022 be adopted. Moved by Councillor Cunningham, second by Councillor Niche. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion's carried. Recommendation that the minutes of the public hearing of March 28th, 2022 be adopted as presented. Moved by Councillor Cunningham, second by Councillor Randawa. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion's carried. And item D, recommendation that the minutes of the committee of the whole meeting, March 28th, 2022 be adopted. Moved by Councillor Randawa, seconded by Councillor Adey. All those in favor? Motion's carried.
Aye.
Okay, on to reports and resolutions. Report from the corporate administrator regarding council resolution status updates of March 2022.
Thank you. There's nothing further to report, simply the information that was included in your council package.
Perfect, thank you. So we'll move on to item B, report from the Director of Operations and Intergovernmental Relations regarding major projects and our monthly update. Director Pucci.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick analysis here. The 3rd Avenue extension is 15% complete. Geotechnical investigation is complete and currently under review. Eat Street is 100% complete. We have 3 food trucks on site. The washrooms are open now 24 hours a day. However, I have to report that the washrooms are seeing some significant abuse and sleeping inside. So we are working with the RCMP on that. The new landfill cell is 100% complete. RCMP detachment staff envision the site preparation to start this summer. Road closure program is with council right now. Recycling program 100% complete. We are continually monitoring the status and looking for efficiencies with that. The SCADA system is 5% complete. We're working on our immediate SCADA upgrades, and then we are working on geotechnical assessments for the new towers. Sewer program, the sewer treatment program, 5% complete. Geotechnical investigation is complete, and we are applying for new funding on that to close that gap. Submarine line water treatment are 5 and 10% complete. We're working on the RFPs and hopefully have those out very shortly. Waterfront project 15% complete. We are working on that. We've had some great meetings in the last little while, and we're continually to advance that. Woodworth Dam 95% complete. We still envision that completing at the end of May. And just in closure, for the next meeting, I will likely bring some aerial shots of some of these projects so that council can see some of these, like the dam and our treatment areas and the new landfill cell. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Pucci. We'll move on to item C. So report from Director of Operations and Intergovernmental Relations regarding the CN Station Archery and the RCMP Detachment Project Transition Notification.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The recommendation is that council receive this notification and pass resolution for project transition. Council has recently approved our new master service agreement to CTNCA. We would like to transition these projects over to the new MSA to continue with the rates and to continue with our contractor availability and schedule. There is no annual budget impact associated with this transition. Thank you.
Okay, we'll call that to question. Moved by Councillor Niche, second by Councillor Moreau. So a recommendation that council receives the following notification and passes resolution for the project transition. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any discussion from council? Motion's carried. So we'll move on to item D, report from planning regarding a development activity report for March 2022. Welcome.
Okay. So this development activity report summarizes development activity in the city of Prince Rupert from March 2022. The report is intended to inform council on applications that have been received and their current status. In terms of development permits, including minor works or sign permits, 4 were approved, 1 is in progress, and 1 is on hold. In terms of development variance permits, 6 were approved, 1 was denied, 3 are in progress, and 1 is on hold. In terms of temporary use permits, 1 is on hold. In terms of OCP and or zoning bylaw amendments, 2 are in progress and 4 are on hold.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So we'll move on to item E. So report from planning regarding development variance permit number 22-05 for 1107 11th Avenue East. Thanks.
So an application was received for a development variance permit for the property located at 1107 11th Avenue East. So the application involves a request for a variance of section 5.2.6B of the zoning bylaw to have a 1.2192 meter setback from the rear property line in relation to a proposed deck. So the required setback from the rear property line in R2 zone is 3 meters, and this is a variance of 1.7808 meters. There are no known negative impacts of the proposed variance on the surrounding neighborhood. However, the public will have the opportunity to provide input during the public consultation period. The recommendation is that council proceeds with the statutory notification process for DVP 2205.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So we'll move that by Councillor Cunningham, or do you just? Yeah, and seconded by Councillor Niche. Any discussion from council? Start with Councillor Cunningham.
Okay, I spoke to the owner of this property earlier today, and he indicated that he wanted a farther, he wants to build a deck, and I'd like to make a friendly amendment to that the footings be at 4 feet setback, which is what is recommended, and then he can cantilever the deck past the 4 foot level or 4 foot setback as per building code. So it can only go X number of feet past the beam. So if this is acceptable, then I'd like to make that friendly amendment.
So the director of operations and the engineering services manager recommended a 4 feet setback from the laneway. So that is kind of what I factored in when I.
So he's going to be allowed to go cantilever past the 4 foot setback?
No.
Yeah, well, this is the amendment I'm making right now.
Right.
Yeah. That's the amendment I'd like to make, that if it's acceptable to the owner, and city manager would speak to it, but is there a seconder? Or
Second the amendment. Okay. So just quickly, we'll check in with the city manager. Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I understand that the concern about having it at 4 feet was having to do with possible works within the municipal right-of-way and this footing being too close to the right-of-way. If the footing is held back at a minimum of 4 feet, a cantilever could occur, and this is discussed with the the director late today. So the footing was back at 4 feet, cantilever to within a foot of the property line would address the concerns that staff had. A friendly amendment or amendment could be made to allow this. And before sending out notices, we would check with the property owner to see if this is okay with them. I can't imagine that it would be a problem because this is enabling, it's not requiring.
Thank you.
Okay, any further discussion from members of council? So motion, it looks like we have on the floor right now is to amend at this point. So, okay. All those in favor? Okay, motion's carried. Okay, we'll move on to item F for report from the planning department regarding a development area variance permit.
Point of order. We have to pass, that was an amendment, must pass. Now we have to pass the motion as amended, just for procedure-wise.
Sorry, Madam Corporate Administrator. Oh.
The resolution was the one that was moved by Councillor Cunningham and seconded by Councillor Niche, so we just need to pass that one and we can proceed.
So the previous motion as well, even though we've done the amendment, as amended. As amended, gotcha. Okay, because we had a mover and seconder for the as a stand. Okay, gotcha. Okay, so recommendation to move the motion as amended. So we had Councillor Niche and Councillor Cunningham. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion's carried. Round two, item number letter F. Report from Planning Department regarding a development variance permit number 22-09 for 1130 11th Avenue East.
Yes, so an application was received for a development variance permit for the property located at 1130 11th Avenue East. The application involves a request for a variance of section 5.2.6b of the zoning bylaw to have a 1.2192 meter setback from the rear property line in relation to a proposed accessory building. The required setback from the rear property line in an R2 zone is 3 meters. So this is a variance of 1.7808 meters. There are no known negative impacts of the proposed variance on the surrounding neighborhood. However, the public will have the opportunity to provide input during the public consultation period. The recommendation is that council proceeds with the statutory notification process for DVP 2209.
Moved by Councillor Niche, seconded by Councillor Cunningham. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion's carried. Thank you very much. Okay, going on to bylaws. So we've got item A, Z, so I'll just go with the phonetic alphabet. Zulu Bravo Lima Alpha dash 2103 for 1220 Portage Road. So a recommendation that council give fourth and final reading to the City of Prince Rupert Official Community Plan, bylaw number 3489, 2022, to allow the change of property designation from the residential to industrial. Second recommendation, so we want to, do you want to do them as a package? Two separate motions, gotcha. So we'll call the first one to question. Moved by Councillor Cunningham, seconded by Councillor Niche. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any discussion? We're missing some steps here. Yeah. Motion's carried. So we'll go on to the second recommendation. So give fourth and final reading to the City of Prince Rupert zoning bylaw number 3490 2022 to allow the change to rezone the property from P1 public facilities to M1 light industrial. Moved by Councillor Randowa, second by Councillor Cunningham. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion's carried. Okay, on to item B. Cemetery fees and charges amendment bylaw number 3491 2022. Recommendation that council gives fourth and final reading to cemetery fees and charges amendment bylaw number 3491 2022. Moved by Councillor Niche, second by Councillor Cunningham. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion's carried. Okay, item C, road closure bylaw number 3488, 2022. Recommendation that council repeals third reading of the road closure bylaw number 3488, 2022. Moved by Councillor Niche, second by Councillor Cunningham. Any discussion? Go ahead, Councillor Niche.
Just wondering why we're going backwards a step on this one.
So the repeal is necessary to permit an appropriate process. So we need to do first and second reading, and then public notification, then third reading. So given that we did 3 readings at the last meeting, we'll repeal the third. Public notification has gone out, so we'll be back in order.
Thank you.
Councillor Cunningham, you had some comments? Okay. Any other discussion from members of council? All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion's carried. So item D, report from city manager regarding business regulations and licensing bylaw number 3476, 2021. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There we go. I thought I had it on. Thank you, Mr. Chair. We received a letter asking a number of questions, 4 questions, about the bylaw, and I put together a report addressing the questions. I think they were very good questions that were asked. The first one was about the cost of rehousing. If there is rehousing required under the bylaw, would this be a cost to the landlord for accommodation and moving? And the answer is no, it would not. With respect to the ancillary question for item number 1, and this is under background of the report to council, if there's nothing available, then they would have to wait until something is available under the bylaw for alternative or temporary accommodation. Next point was they would like to see some clarifying language on the implications of suspending a license. Noting that there could be unintended consequences, such as the owners basically getting their license suspended so that they could then evict and rent out again under different conditions. So I've suggested some clarifying language in here, which would basically say if it's suspended but you reapply, it's under the license is under the same terms as was previously in place in order to avoid a potential loophole. Also adding in any cost for moving would be to the landlord in that particular instance. The third item, it was noted that in report of September 20th, it was noted that there could be an application for an exemption for council to consider on a case-by-case basis. So that language has been included in the bylaw. And finally, it was noted that New Westminster removed the part on rent evictions from their bylaw. And indeed they did. That was something that was news to us and news to our lawyer. Now, we would note that there are additional protections afforded to tenants under the bylaw as drafted, and the report lays out what the current provincial legislation provides and what our bylaw would provide in terms of additional protections. So the question for council is, do they want those additional protections? Do they want to exempt certain classes of projects? We're recommending that at a minimum you exempt single-family duplex and any suites that there may be in there. You may also want to exempt projects that are smaller, like 10 units or less. You could exempt it. You could pull that provision, the rent eviction, out of the bylaw entirely, but it's one of the core provisions of the bylaw. Or you could increase the size of the project that could be exempt. There are a number of choices there. We've made recommendations, and the recommendations are on page 1 of the staff report, and all the changes that would be made to the bylaw, if you agreed, are underlined, highlighted in the attached bylaw.
Thank you, Mr. City Manager. So recommendation on the floor right now is that the council repeal third reading of bylaw number 3475, 2021, from March 28th, 2022, and give third reading to the business regulations and licensing bylaw number 3476, 2021 as amended. Moved by Councillor Moreau. Second by Councillor Niche. Any discussion? Councillor Moreau.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. My question for the city manager is in respect to the option you've put in front of us in terms of carving out an exemption for smaller units. So I'm wondering where the rationale for 10 units or less has come from. Is that just the starting point for negotiating?
So I've given two options in here. One is exempting single-family, two-family units and secondary suites, and that's what's written into the bylaw. But recognizing that there could be a different view on this, if council sees this as being too difficult for small rental projects, you could expand that to 10 units. You could expand it to more. So it's something of an arbitrary number, 10. It's trying to capture what would be smaller projects versus larger projects, but council could very well pick a different number if they wanted to include that in the exemption.
Thanks very much. And the reason I asked that question is because I am kind of two minds on this one. I definitely don't want to go any higher than 10. I know that much. My gut tells me I don't want to go any higher than that because we want to have this bylaw apply to as many complexes as we can, but with that said, be responsive to some of this feedback that I think is the case was made very, very strongly, and I think your amendments deal with each of these points raised. So I am really curious to hear what everyone else on council feels, where my gut is less than 10, but I don't want to just choose another arbitrary number. So open the floor beyond that question.
Councillor Eady.
Well, I can comment on that aspect, although I have a different question to raise. To me, I'm not sure where you draw the line. I'm very ambivalent because, so maybe I could put it in the form of a question and call myself a slow learner, which in my world, people that know me would say is entirely accurate. Why would we exempt? What is the benefit of exempting? Take us all the way up the line. A single family home with a suite. Why would we exempt them? So what's the logic? So that I can then see if I can sort out in my own mind how far do I want to extend that logic.
Through the chair, I think the point that was raised by the letter writer was there would be a burden on small landlords under the renovation portion of the bylaw. So for somebody that has a house and is renting out a suite to or a duplex or is renting out both of them, it's the notion is that the provisions for a single property owner, and I realize that somebody could own more than one rental property of that scale, that it could be a pretty significant burden. Equally so, if it's a small complex that's not owned by a company but a smaller family operation, it could be very onerous on them. Now, the other side of that is that this is protection for tenants, and this is something of a value judgment. So I've tried to lay out options to see what best fits this council's values in terms of how much tenant protection is provided versus how much landlords, at what scale do you impose this on property owners? A larger project or everybody. It really is something of a value judgment. So I leave that to council.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I suppose I'd like to leave that point, and perhaps others will weigh in. I do remember that the history of the initiative in the first place was about tenants, first and foremost, and in my view, I think that's the final sort of arbiter in terms of the lens that you view these things through. At what point do we extend the exemptions to the point that we've abandoned the original purpose? So I suppose, just as my final word on that particular point, I feel like we could probably go less than 10, but I recognize that there might need to be a number picked to create that sort of window for those properties that are slightly larger than single homes. I did actually have a different question, and maybe I could put this question and that might help us clarify the options. If I understand it correctly, we're being offered 3 options. One, with regard to this section, the option 1 is to leave it in place, recognizing that as the situation stands now, wording in our bylaw would then duplicate wording that has been adopted by the provincial government. Is that correct? Maybe not duplicating exact wording, but the provincial government has created some regulations that we're touching on as well as it stands.
Through the chair, the provincial government has made some changes affording more rights through their legislation for tenants. The city's bylaw, as it currently is written, affords more protection than the provincial legislation. We're allowed to do that. We can't go less, but we can go more. So the question is, how far do you want to extend that protection? Is it to everybody, or is it to larger projects, or somewhere in between?
Okay, so stick with me here. So that's one option. I'm wondering whether there might be a case where the province, where we have gray area disputes, where a provincial oversight might conclude that A is the correct way to resolve the conflict, but when it's brought to the city bylaw level, our own outcome might be different, and what would then happen?
If council adopts a bylaw with the additional protection, then the additional protection is afforded the tenants.
I guess just to finish my options there, one was to delete the elements that are covered by the province now, leaving only the additional pieces in place, which I think is the one that I'm leaning towards. And the third option is to remove the whole thing entirely because the province is taking care of it. Is that a correct summary?
With respect to the last point, you could remove that section entirely, as did the city of New Westminster, but it is not as it doesn't provide as much protection for tenants as the city's bylaw. So you could do that. With the proposed amendments that I've suggested here on the eviction part and the regulations around that, tries to strike a balance between removing it entirely and keeping it as it's initially written. Right? So it's I recognize that balance is something of a judgment call. So I've given you options and seeing where council's values, with respect to this question, land.
Okay, well then I will state my preference that we remove anything that is duplicated in the provincial legislation, let that stand there, and keep the additional protections that we're offering in our bylaw.
Through the chair, I'm not sure what you would remove from the bylaw, because I don't think that the bylaw is duplicating the province's legislation. It just is. What all our bylaw does is it goes further than the legislation. So I don't think there's anything to strike from the bylaw unless the corporate administrator has another perspective on that. So I don't think that is an option that we're identifying.
Okay, I'll let it go. I might be misunderstanding something.
Okay.
Councillor Niche?
The number that comes to my mind and the logic I have behind it would be 5 or more units, and not doing 4 and under. And the reason why, the logic I have behind it would be, we've had discussions about if you had a duplex and then allowing suites to be built in duplexes. So now that's a smaller project where you would have basically more typically one owner, one property, compared to something that would be more like an apartment building where you would have more people maybe potentially owning it together, or bigger corporations owning it. So because I know we had discussed before about potentially allowing suites in duplexes, so that would be 4 units. So I look at it as maybe 5 or more would be the number the logic I see.
Through the chair, that would be recommendation item D. So it is that item D refers to duplexes and any suites that may be in there. So if council doesn't permit the suites within duplexes, that would be captured by your preference.
Councillor Cunningham?
Councillor Neese sort of covered it, but I have a problem if somebody has a duplex and puts 5 suites in it, or a duplex and puts 2 extra suites in it. Now you've got a 4-plex. And they have the capabilities of renovating and finding alternative accommodations, I guess you could say, but it's just, I can see this getting a little out of hand, and we're taking protection away from some people, but I could agree with more along the lines of what Councillor Neese is saying, but I don't like the idea of a duplex being turned into a 4-plex or a 5-plex, which is happening in the city right now, and then these landlords would be exempt from the bylaw.
Mr. City Manager?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through to Councillor Cunningham. I appreciate the point that you're making about your concerns with secondary suites in duplexes. That is currently not allowed. That is one of Council's housing action recommendations, and when it will be presented for Council decision within the next month or 2. At that point, Council can decide whether or not to proceed with that action item. So Council can say no to that proceeding. But right now, that is an action item that Council's asked us to bring forward to them in the bylaw. Keeping this as item D, which basically says exempting putting an exemption in section 44 for single-family duplexes or any suites that may be in there, won't permit anybody to have suites in the duplexes. It would not have that effect. It would simply say that if council did permit that through a zoning bylaw amendment, then that would be exempted from the rental protection. So there is a separate decision point in discussion with respect to the question or concern you've raised about the suites in duplexes.
Can I
Mayor
speak,
Brain?
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so yeah, the resolution on the floor then is item A to E are the amendments, correct, Mr. Buchan?
Almost, sorry, through the chair, almost, Mr. Mayor. It's
So when it says council amends by law as follows, A to E are the amendments as amended portion of it, correct?
No, between D and E there is the word or.
Oh, I see, or there. Oh,
Yeah.
I see, okay.
So
I
it's
gotcha.
A, B, C, and D, or E, right?
Or
So-
E,
so-
okay,
so-
got
so-
it.
so it'd
That's
be-
why when you
yeah.
said choice, I was like, what choice? But I see or now after the quotations there. My only concern with this entire bylaw really, it breaks down to what Paul Legay said about people paying for people's relocation. I think there's a difference between, rental property management teams that have stock across the province or across the Canada. They manage these things for a living versus the mom and pa's that have, maybe like Mr. Buchan's saying 10 units or less or a couple homes or whatever it is. And then they choose to do something. And these people aren't millionaires. They still have paychecks and now they're on the hook to pay for someone else's rent that they can't afford. That to me there's a balance there. So, there are people in our community that obviously have properties that they rent out that aren't management people. They just have it as either investment or however they have acquired it. And I think that to me is my primary concern out of this whole thing. Everything else I think is great, and I agree with all the amendments. So I think when it comes to the 10 units or less part, that was to target probably smaller facilities, I guess you could say, because most of these rental management places have much more than 10 units. I'm not sure there's anything in town that has less than 10 units that's managed by like a professional company that does rentals for a living. So that's my only consideration here. I want to make sure that we're not punishing someone, but also protecting renters. So that's kind of where my line is drawn. And I think Paul was correct when he said, as much as we're for tenants, there is this kind of awkward piece that all of a sudden now, if someone's on the hook to pay for 10 rents and they're just, a mom and pop operation trying to do some renovations, it's pretty much unaffordable to them and that would collapse them. And I don't think that's our intention either. So that's where my only consideration is I'm not exactly sure what recommendation to take between the D and E personally, because like you said, 10 is kind of ad hoc.
Other
So
arrangements.
those are just my thoughts on the situation. Other than that, I think Mr. Buchan, you've really reflected the conversation in the amendments.
Mr. Chair? Thank you. And just for clarification, when I looked at the concern or the question about whether or not relocation costs would be required, under the way the bylaw is written, for an eviction or a relocation under this bylaw, there is no relocation cost being required. The landlord for any of it does not pay for relocation, with the one exception of somebody that is trying to get their license canceled so they could evict and then rent it out to somebody else. That was a loophole, that question that was posed by the person that wrote the letter. So I actually put that in as a I guess as a measure that would discourage somebody from unethically losing their license, so that they would have to say, sorry, you don't have license, you can't stay here, goodbye. So the way that's written, that loophole has been closed, is saying if you lose your license and you go to rent again, you have to offer it back to those people at the same terms, and any moving costs you have to pay for. But that would be more of a punitive response to somebody trying to use a loophole. With respect to the normal process in the bylaw for a temporary relocation, there is no requirement for the landlord to pay for moving. The only requirement is that they have to make other arrangements. It doesn't say that they pay for those arrangements. They have to basically find a unit for somebody else to live in.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Okay, so I feel much more comfortable with that then. I would be open to other thoughts around the D or E recommendation. I am not sure which direction to move with that recommendation. Do you have a thought on which way council should go there, Mr. Buchan?
I put it at a minimum, exempting the duplexes and single family with suites, because in the large majority of those cases, my understanding is that those won't be those will be individually owned. So I think that's the minimum. It really depends on whether or not you feel that there are a lot of multifamily projects that are less than 10 units that are, owned by smaller operators or by families or by an individual that, this could impose a hardship on them. And I simply don't have enough information to call that. So I would defer to council's wisdom on that question.
Councillor Cunningham, provide us with some wisdom.
I would rather go with D than E. Like it gives more protection. It's a smaller number, and I think that's the way to go. But if we're this confused about this and that, maybe we should have a further discussion about it. But I would recommend D because it gives more protection to people. Like it's 10 or less is kind of opening up to bigger landlords and things like that. And one example was a recent apartment that did have a fire in it, and that would have come under the exemption. And I'd hate to see buildings like that under the exemption, and not considering. And we're trying to protect the people from landlords like that. So I think D would be better than E, in my opinion. And that's what I would recommend.
Thank you, Councillor Cunningham. Councillor Moreau?
And I agree with Councillor Cunningham, and that's why I think that is the motion on the floor, I believe, right now, is A to D. Yeah, that was my understanding. So to Councillor Nisha's point around 5 or less, I think you provided that clarification. The 2 family dwelling units or secondary suites, if any of those units, captures that 5 or less, I think, fairly accurately. The only other point I would make in support of that is there is reference made regard to the language, rental owners may also make an application to council for an exemption which council can consider on a case-by-case basis. That's giving us a bit of an out if there's any exceptions to this rule, or if there's any unforeseen circumstances or unintended consequences that we might see as a result of adopting this bylaw. So I think allowing ourselves the ability to consider things on a case-by-case basis moving from here tonight, I'm happy with the amendments A to D.
Okay, sorry, Councillor Nish and then Councillor Landau.
So just to clarify then, when you say a duplex, now if we change in the next month or two and we change a duplex to allow 2 basement suites in it, is that considered a 4 units and a 4-plex, or is it still considered a duplex with 2 units in it? And that's why I've kind of come up with that number of basically 5 or more, because I look at it as if all these people convert their places to duplexes, can place them to 4-plexes, well then, that's typically the mom and pop sort of thing that we're having this discussion about. People, single owned units, not corporation run places or apartment buildings, and that's why. So I'm just kind of looking for a little clarification on that.
City Manager.
Through the chair, the report in the bylaw hasn't been completed yet. I understand the intent of the council direction, and the way that the bylaw is being drafted is, and if this is approved by council, is that there be lock-off units allowed in the secondary suites, secondary suites into duplex. So there'd be 4 residential units, 4 potential rental units in that scenario. So that's 1 less than 5, right? So we won't know the answer definitively until the bylaws before council and adopted.
So to further to that, if say hypothetically if that was allowed, so now would they have to apply for a rezoning to have 4 units? Because it's now 4 units, right?
Yeah. So let me answer it in a different way. It's a single family, R1 zone, single family zone. You can have a suite. It's a single family dwelling with a suite. That's the way the bylaw is written. The bylaw would be written for duplexes. It would say it's a 2-family dwelling with a suite each. So that's the way if council approves that, you know, and that's yet to be determined. That would, once that's done in the bylaw, then the zoning bylaw is being changed, and there's no subsequent rezoning in order to have the 2 units and the suites. That is a separate exercise.
Yeah.
The way this is written is it's enabling that to be exempted if council proceeds with it. If council does not proceed with it, with that change allowing suites and duplexes, what would be effectively exempted here is a duplex or a single family with a suite.
Okay, I mean, see, that's where I'm struggling a little bit, because if you know, and I'm speaking hypothetically here, because as a 4-unit place, you know, you would normally have to apply for a rezoning to do that. So now all of a sudden you're taking, you know, essentially every duplex in town could be a 4-unit building, which, you know, that's why I came up with that number for this, because to me a duplex is, you know, it's 2 units, you know, not 2 units plus 2 in the basement. So that's, you know, where that's where I come up with that number, because I'm thinking, well, I would look at that as if you wanted 4 units in your place, you would have to have a rezoning application, you know, because it's high density, right? So that's where thinking that if you had 4 units, it would be you actually wouldn't be, you know, a duplex anymore. You would be a 4-plex.
So what the logic, as I understand it, behind the recommendation in the housing action was the council, by allowing suites or lock-off units in duplexes, is enabling more rental stock to be built, more housing stock to be built, without a barrier of a process barrier of having to go through a rezoning. It was about, you know, I think it's in the context of Prince Rupert, of recognizing the enormous need for housing and facilitating it in a more expeditious way. What's also interesting is that this is not terribly dissimilar with what the provincial government has been saying that they're contemplating doing in the fall anyways, is saying, you know, no single family zoning. I've not seen any of the legislation yet. I think the intent behind that was to say, you know, we need to have densification, small infill densification as an outright right throughout communities throughout the province, as a way of dealing with the growing supply, demand, and balance of residential units. So it's similar thought with that. But you know, this would put Prince Rupert ahead of that, and you know, be more proactive if council decides to proceed. But that is a separate question. It's a question for council to be addressing in the next month or 2.
Yeah, I'm just trying to, you know, put it in the perspective of, if we went that route, you know, what number's right for this, and I'm looking at it as more like a duplex is duplex is 2 units in my eyes, not 4, right? So I'm looking at it as, if someone singly owned a duplex and they put 2 suites in it, then, you know, it's still kind of one small building owned by someone, and that's why I'm using that number of 4. But you're telling me basically, if we went ahead with that, it's really not technically 4, it's actually 2 with a suite.
It's the same logic of calling a single family dwelling with a suite.
Yeah.
Right. So it's built into the bylaw. It would be built into the bylaw that it's a duplex, except for they have suites.
Yeah. Okay.
Councillor Randhawa and then Councillor Cunningham.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, so I'd like to thank staff for recommending all the changes, and I'm comfortable with the changes.
Perfect. Thank you, Councillor Randhawa. Councillor Cunningham.
Well, the way I see it, D covers what Councillor Neese is talking about in the future, because, you know, when you look at a duplex, it's actually 2 single-family dwellings. and then you're gonna be allowing suites in there, so it becomes a fourplex. I can see his reasoning too, but it becomes a fourplex. But what I'm getting at is there's people that have duplexes that are putting an extra suite in there, and it's a fiveplex then, and those are the people that we've got to look out for. And, you know, so putting the number at 4, which D sort of covers, and then if we do pass the legislation coming up, it's going to help that too, because that's already covering that. So I think D is the way to go. And it gives us, if people have a duplex, you know, putting 2 more suites in, as long as they got the parking and things like that, I've got no problem with it. But the crutch to adding that type of density in a residential area sometimes is parking. You know, it's something we got to be very careful about, because already, you know, you're getting, most families have 2 cars, sometimes 3. Now if you do the math, 4, that's 12 cars. You know, and all of a sudden the streets are filled with cars. And we've got that problem already, and as much as we want to densify areas, we've got to be careful about the parking in those areas as well. But I think D covers the problem.
Councillor Eddy?
I would just like to say that I agree with the point that Councillor Moreau said, that we can draw, you know, in the end we will draw a line. And those owners who fall on the wrong side of that line in terms of exemption will always have the right to appeal. And so in a way it just becomes a bit of a moot point, because one would assume that if a party that was not exempted felt aggrieved by that, they've got a process to follow.
So I will look to our Madam Corporate Administrator for procedure, just when it comes to, because I think we've kind of made some additional amendments to our already amendment.
No, the way I see it, you have a motion on the floor to accept A through D as amended by
Perfect.
Councillor Moreau and seconded by Councillor Niche.
Perfect.
Just need to call a question.
Call to question. All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion's carried.
Great work to the staff. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. So, on to reports, questions, and inquiries from members of council. Councillor Niche?
I just wanted to say that I had the privilege of attending the All Native tournament on behalf of the city, and welcoming the people. And I thought the HIDA did a spectacular job of hosting the opening ceremonies. It was my first time watching the opening ceremonies live. And it does it way more justice than watching it on a computer screen from home.
Thank you, Councillor Niche. Councillor Cunningham?
A quick question for engineering is, on the corner of Sloan and McKay, there was a light standard knocked down, and it's been down for quite a while, and I've had some complaints from neighbors there about how dark that corner is, and I drove by there the other day, and not only was that light standard out, but another one farther down the block was out, so it almost had a blackout in that area there, and it's, I'm just wondering when this is going to be addressed.
Thank you, Councillor.
Yeah, Director.
I wasn't aware of that lamp standard being down, but I can take a look at it tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Pucci. Councillor Rendell?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, same like Councillor Wade. So I would like to thank All Native Tournament Committee for organizing this event here, and everybody enjoy the games. And like to thank city staff for doing great job there, sanitizing after a few games. So everybody appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rendell. Any other comments here for members of council? Okay, just a few points. Just thank Councillor Niche for stepping in on my behalf there and on the mayor's behalf. for the All Native tournament, and just a congratulations to all the teams that took part. Thank you to the volunteers, and a thank you to the Haida Nation for putting on such a powerful performance. So for me, I definitely would have liked to have seen that in person, recovering myself and having to step some time away. But seeing it on screen was definitely did not do as much justice as I imagine it would in person, but it was a really powerful performance to watch. And again, I just want to thank all of the team members and all of the nations for coming into town and to just show us. And for me, it was a lot of really powerful medicine to kind of experience that and what's possible when we all come together, Indigenous on non-Indigenous alike. So thank everyone for participating and for coming into the city of Prince Rupert. And with that, I will call to question to adjourn the meeting. Moved by Councillor Wendell, seconded by Councillor Moreau. All those in favor?
Aye.
Meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Have a good night, guys.